If you want to read this particular article, you can go to justinstellman.com/A25. Why labels are toxic to your growth. A while ago here in California, they tried to pass a law that would require all produce to be labeled so that people could know exactly what they were eating. To be honest, I don't know why it didn't pass. I think the company said that it would require more work on their part, or the price of the food would go up. It's a nice little scare tactic that prevents people from knowing exactly what they're ingesting. But outside of situations like that, the issues with judgments and labels can be very harmful for how we live out our lives. Now, in saying that, I'm making a judgment about labels, so we have to be very careful with how we use language and how we think. Be that as it may, labeling something starts you on a long path down the road of judgment, separation, and the stories that further keep you stuck in your current pattern of thinking. Now, imagine a world with no labels or no judgment. Wouldn't that be amazing? See what I did there? I created a mental framework where you were separate from labels and judgment and thought that you could only be happy if those things were removed from your life. Now, with that said, how many times have you heard somebody label another person a certain word and then judge them for that? I see it every single day. In my formal world, that would come in the form of somebody calling you a non-Christian. They'd slap that label on you and then proceed from there. Recently, I heard a story about a woman who was at a Tony Robbins event, and she was called on stage by Tony Robbins himself. He asked her, why can't she have a breakthrough? What was holding her back? Her answer? Trust. Her husband was lying to her, and she couldn't take it anymore. What's the first thing that came to mind for you? Was it that her husband was cheating on her for having an affair? Yep, that's what exactly the audience of 4,000 people in the room also thought. But it turns out that they had wanted to go on vacation for 10 years, and he opened a secret bank account to help save money for the vacation. He ended up saving $20,000 for their trip. But in her mind, she couldn't live with someone who she couldn't trust and would lie to her for 10 years. See how labeling and judging can cause your mind to go in a million different directions? My first thought would be to label him as a cheater or an adulterer and then judge him accordingly. The issue is that labels are given to us by our friends and our family. We get these labels through osmosis just by being around certain people. And with labels automatically comes judgment. It's almost impossible to have one without the other. Here's an example out of my own life. Our next door neighbors are chain smokers. While I hate smoking, I do my workouts in the backyard, and almost like clockwork, as soon as I begin my workout for the day, they start smoking in their backyard. As soon as this happens, I immediately get mad and angry. Why? Because of my judgments, which come from labeling them a certain way. I label them as people that aren't aware of how their decisions impact other people, which makes them selfish, and who likes selfish people? Perhaps I could take it a step further and create a story about how they're doing it on purpose to disrupt my workouts. If I did that, then I could label them as mean and sinister people who don't like me. Then I could call them even more names, aka labels, which would allow me to judge them even more, further creating the divide between us. Now, the quote, spiritual way of looking at the situation is to say that they are me and we are one. They're just a version of me that's not acting in a healthy way like I am by doing my workouts. We've all had times when we messed up. Maybe this is just me messing up without being aware of it. Or I could look at them as an invitation to cleanse my lungs even more and take even better care of my health. There are options because we create the rules for how we live, what we experience, and what we think. We make all the rules here because it's our life. TV and media are true masters in creating labels for people and then judging anybody with that label. Religion is pretty amazing at that also. It works well. It creates drama. It creates people that fight instead of love, and ultimately it keeps us distracted about what's really going on in the world. It's genius. Politicians might be the best at it, though. Now they're creating hashtags like hashtag I'm with her, meaning they're supporting Hillary Clinton here in the United States during the run for presidency. You're either for us or you're against us. You're either a Democrat or a Republican. You're either this, you're either that. It's simply not true. You see, a label is not even a real thing. Without any human beings on the earth, can you show me what a Republican or Democrat looks like? The word, not a human, will you call one or the other? You see, you can't because it's not real. None of it's real. It's all a fake dream world they've given to you to internalize so you can see the world the way they want you to see it. The real world is that which happens internally. Everything we see has borders. This table I'm writing on clearly has lines of distinction between where the table ends and where nothingness or air starts. When you go out into the woods, you can see where the trees start and where the trees end. But it's the meaning we put onto these nouns like trees and their endpoints that screw everything up. See, we walk along in the woods and we say, that's a cedar tree, or that's a cypress tree, that's a plant, that's an orchid. If we have a particularly dramatic story around a flower or a tree, that story is what messes us up. We think that the story or label is the same thing as the tree. Maybe our dad fell out of a cedar tree one day and died. Maybe an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend gave you an orchid the day before he or she broke up with you. Now you have a whole story in your mind about what these things mean. It's a story that's based on a judgment that comes from a label. What if you looked at an orchid, not as an orchid or even a flower, but have no words to describe it? It was just life emanating from the ground. Once you call something or someone a word, that's where you get in trouble. That word can come loaded with preconceived ideas, opinions, and judgments that are unique to each person. So now each person gets to have a different reason for hating somebody that's been called by a particular label. Humans are so weird, aren't we? But how do we find our way out? The first step is to take back our language. Understand, and that means to stand under or take responsibility for, that language is a tool that was given to you by somebody else who had their own set of insecurities and issues to deal with. One of the first things that a nation does to control another nation when they overtake them is to control their language. That's outside of controlling their religion, their education, and their money. How can one start using language for their benefit then? Be particularly aware of the use of nouns. Verbs carry less judgment, although they still carry some, but nouns are harmful. When you say that somebody is black, or they're a cheater, or they're a jerk, this is where the real issues lie. Nouns. Nouns are like little judgment bombs, and they're going off inside you. They're killing the very essence of who you are. Now your life force energy is spent not on promoting health and healing, but killing parts of yourself with these noun bombs and then cleaning up the rubble. But on the flip side, a noun is not bad. A noun is just a series of 4 letters written on a screen somewhere. A noun is just a series of lines in space. The issues are all occurring in our mind and in our spirit. The way to become aware of the use of language and how it's being used against you is by meditation and actually looking for it. It's like when you buy a car and you start seeing the same type of car everywhere. It's the same thing. Start looking at how you and other people use labels or nouns, and you'll start to notice it everywhere. Just make sure not to judge other people for not knowing what you now know. Meditation has played a huge key role in helping me to understand who I really am and the ability to accept things for what they are rather than labeling them and judging them like I used to. When you're aware that your soul, that eternal part of you, has absolutely nothing to do with your opinions or your labels or even what you do, it's much easier to let things go. For example, when people talk bad about you, how do you react? How do I react? Again, it comes down to language. Why would I want to react their behaviors? The better question is, how do I respond? Well, what's really happening when someone online says a bunch of lies about you in public? I could read that better. Well, what's really happening when someone online says a bunch of lies about you in public? They're simply sitting by a piece of metal and plastic, aka a computer, and making their fingertips touch a keyboard in a certain way that creates black lines on a screen. That's really all that's happening. People are simply moving their fingers in a certain way, tapping on plastic keys. Everything else is our reactions to labels. Quote, they said I'm a horrible person, or that I cheated on my spouse and now I hate them because they're a liar, end quote. The war that's happening is happening inside the other person. They use outside stimuli, aka a computer, a keyboard, language, a phone, their voice, etc., to try to bring that war inside of us. The outside stimuli are simply tools for battle. These people are using tools to bring their war they're experiencing inside of them, inside of us. It's their war. Let them have it. And let them be one with it. They're upset and angry about life. They're living in a world they created for themselves filled with nouns and labels and judgment. It's a horrible world to live in. When we step outside of all of that and start looking at everything with no labels and subsequently no judgment, everything becomes colorful and new again. We see things like we did as a child. It's like traveling. Traveling is fun because it's new, but traveling happens only on the outside. You can travel on the inside by creating a world with no labels or judgments where everything is new again. Everything is in flux and becomes what you want it to be. When we label something, what's happening is that we flash freeze it. Instead of becoming a thriving and growing flower that's dynamic and changes every day, it simply becomes an orchid. It can't be anything different because that's what you say it is. In actuality, it does what it wants to do, but you, in your mind, it's an orchid and does whatever we've defined orchids as being able to do. You see, nouns freeze things. In reality, everything is changing, everything is dynamic, and everything is in flow. When we get out of the labeling game, we can see the beauty of what things are, and we can now create new realities for them and for us. Again, if you want to read this article, just go to justinstellman.com